Imagine the dawn of the 1600s. A raw, untamed continent stretches out before a small band of hopefuls. The air is thick, not just with the scent of pine and salt water, but with the electric hum of a new world being born from sheer will and determination. These weren't just settlers seeking land or gold. They were the Puritans, a people driven by a profound and unyielding quest. A thirst not merely for survival, but for something far greater, for wisdom, for knowledge, and for a faith that could illuminate the darkest corners of the wilderness. They arrived on the shores of what would become Massachusetts, their hearts heavy with the memory of the world they left behind, yet beating with the rhythm of a radical dream. In the midst of felling trees, clearing land, and building the first humble shelters against the harsh New England winters, a revolutionary idea began to take root. It was an idea that seemed almost audacious, a defiant spark against the immense, looming wilderness. They understood that a society, a true city upon a hill, could not be built on bread and timber alone. It needed to be founded on intellect, on reason, and on the rigorous pursuit of truth. The greatest danger they faced wasn't starvation or the unforgiving climate, but the creeping shadow of ignorance. They feared a future where their ministers would be uneducated, their leaders unenlightened, and their children lost to the intellectual darkness they had crossed an ocean to escape. And so, a vision was formed, whispered in firelit cabins, and debated in makeshift meeting houses. It was a vision of breathtaking ambition, to carve out a space dedicated to the highest forms of learning, right there, in the heart of the wild. They envisioned a college, a beacon of light that would ensure their values, their faith, and their intellectual heritage would not only survive but flourish for generations to come. This wasn't just about building a school. It was about planting the very seeds of a nation's soul. The challenge was monumental. Where would the funds come from? Who would teach? How could such a lofty institution rise from the mud and mire of a fledgling colony? The odds were stacked impossibly high, yet the commitment was absolute. The early leaders, men like John Winthrop, saw this as a sacred duty, a covenant not just with God, but with the future itself. They knew that to falter would be to let the grand experiment of their new society wither on the vine. This is the story of that audacious beginning. It's the story of how, against all logic and expectation, a small community of believers and scholars dared to dream of a place of learning that would rival the ancient halls of Oxford and Cambridge. They sought to raise up a generation prepared to lead, to preach, and to build a new Jerusalem, armed not with swords, but with books and the clarifying power of educated minds. The year was 1636, and in the small, newly named settlement of Cambridge, the first fragile seeds of American higher education were about to be sown. The journey begins here. Thank you so much for joining me on this first chapter. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do you and miss the next part of this incredible journey. See you in the next episode. Welcome back to our journey through the history of ideas. Last time, we explored how the printing press unlocked knowledge for the mass. Today, we're crossing the Atlantic to a wild, untamed continent, following a group of people who risked everything not for gold or glory, but for an idea, a New England. This is the story of the Puritans and their radical dream. Picture England in the early 1600s. King Charles I is on the throne, and religious tensions are at a boiling point. The Church of England, in the eyes of a devout group known as the Puritans, still felt too much like the Catholic Church it had broken away from. They saw lavish rituals, powerful bishops, and a system they believed was corrupt and strayed from the simple, direct word of God. They wanted to purify the church, to strip it back to its biblical roots. But their calls for reform were met with persecution, not praise. They were fined, imprisoned, and silenced. They faced a choice: conform to a system they believed was spiritually compromised, or leave everything they had ever known behind. So, they made a monumental decision between 1630 and 1640 in what's known as the Great Migration. Over 20,000 Puritans boarded rickety wooden ships and set sail for the unknown shores of North America. This wasn't just a trip, it was an exodus. They left behind their homes, their farms, their families, and the only society they knew. They were headed for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, a place they envisioned not just as a settlement, but as a city upon a hill, a beacon of pure, reformed Christianity for the entire world to see. Governor John Winthrop, their leader, famously declared that the eyes of all people are upon us. The pressure was immense. Failure wasn't just an option. It was a spiritual catastrophe. Now, what's fascinating about the Puritans is how they planned to build this perfect society. It wasn't with swords or fortresses, but with books and schools. At the very heart of their belief system was a radical concept for the time. Every single person, man, woman, and child, should be able to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. This was a direct challenge to the old European model where priests and bishops held the keys to Scripture, telling the common person what to believe. For the Puritans, your personal relationship with God was paramount, and the primary way to cultivate that relationship was through reading His Word. Your salvation literally depended on it. This wasn't just about faith. It was about fighting evil. They believed that ignorance was the devil's playground. An illiterate person was vulnerable to temptation, false prophets, and damnation. Knowledge, therefore, wasn't a luxury. It was a weapon. It was a moral and spiritual necessity, a shield against the forces of darkness. This conviction fueled an unprecedented focus on education. They believed that a society of saints must first be a society of scholars. Think about how revolutionary this was, just a few years after arriving in a rugged wilderness. While they were still struggling to build homes, clear forests, and survive harsh winters, what did they do? In 1636, they founded Harvard College. Its original purpose? To train ministers who could read the Bible in its original Greek and Hebrew, ensuring the intellectual and spiritual purity of their leadership for generations to come. This wasn't an afterthought. It was a foundational act, but it didn't stop with the elite. In 1647, they passed a law called the Old Deluda Satan Act. The name itself tells you everything. The law stated that because Satan's chief project was to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures, every town with 50 or more families had to hire a schoolmaster to teach the children to read and write. Every town with 100 families had to establish a grammar school to prepare boys for university. This was the birth of public education in America, born from the Puritan belief that literacy was next to godliness. It was a system designed to create a populace that could think for itself, question authority, and engage directly with the most important text in their lives. This commitment had a profound effect on New England society. Literacy rates in the colonies soared, far surpassing those in England and the rest of Europe. While other colonies were focused primarily on cash crops like tobacco or sugar, the Puritans were cultivating minds. They built printing presses, published sermons, wrote poetry, and kept detailed journals. They created a culture of letters, of debate, and of intense self-examination. This intellectual foundation, this belief that every individual has the capacity and the responsibility to seek knowledge, would become a cornerstone of the American identity. The Puritan world was far from perfect, of course. It was rigid, often intolerant, and demanded strict conformity. Their city upon a hill could be a harsh and unforgiving place for those who didn't fit in. We'll explore those complexities in future episodes, but their radical insistence on universal literacy and the moral power of knowledge lit a fire. They planted the seeds of an idea that knowledge wasn't just for the privileged few, but was a fundamental right and a civic duty for all. It was an idea that would eventually blossom into the principles of self-governance, intellectual freedom, and the relentless pursuit of a more perfect union. The New England dream, forged in faith and ink, laid a crucial piece of the foundation for the nation to come. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shaped our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning. Welcome back to our series on the origins of America's oldest institutions. Today, we're diving into Chapter 3. The decision to educate. Picture this. It's 1636. The Massachusetts Bay Colony is just 6 years old. It's a rugged, uncertain world. The colonists are carving out a life in a new land, facing harsh winters, unfamiliar territory, and the constant challenge of building a society from scratch. Yet, in the midst of all this, They made a decision that would echo through centuries. What was their most pressing concern? Beyond survival, it was the preservation of their culture, their faith, and their way of life. They looked at the generation of leaders who had guided them across the Atlantic, educated men from Cambridge and Oxford, and they saw them aging. A profound anxiety began to set in. Who would lead the next generation? Who would pastor the churches, teach the children, and govern the colony when they were gone? They feared a future of ignorance, a slide away from the learned and pious society they envisioned. This fear was articulated in a famous pamphlet from the time, New England's First Fruits. It expressed a deep dread of leaving an illiterate ministry to the churches, when our present ministers shall lie in the dust. This wasn't just about jobs. It was about the very soul of their community. Without educated leaders, they believed their grand experiment in the New World would fail. The wilderness wouldn't just be outside their settlements. It would creep into their minds and hearts. So, on October 28th, 1636, the great and general court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the legislative body of the time, gathered in Boston. Amidst discussions of land grants, trade regulations, and defense, they made a monumental vote. They agreed to give £400, a massive sum at the time, equivalent to the entire colony's annual tax levied towards the founding of a shoal or college. This was an audacious, almost reckless act of faith in the future. They were a small, struggling colony, that they were investing a fortune, not in forts or fences, but in mines. The location chosen was a small settlement, just a few miles up the Charles River from Boston, a place called Newtown. It was a deliberate choice. Newtown was seen as a safe, quiet, and suitable place for scholarly pursuits, away from the bustling port of Boston, but still central to the colony. The vision was clear from the start. This wouldn't be just any school. Its primary purpose was to ensure a pipeline of trained ministers for the Puritan churches. But the vision was broader than that. It was also meant to produce educated men who could serve as teachers, magistrates, and leaders in all facets of civic life. This decision laid the cornerstone for what would become America's first college. It was a declaration that education was not a luxury, but a necessity. It was the bedrock upon which a new society would be built. The colonists understood that to build a lasting community, you needed more than just strong backs and fertile land. You needed enlightened minds and a shared intellectual foundation. They were planting a seed, a seminary of learning, hoping it would grow and flourish, providing intellectual and spiritual nourishment for generations to come. What's fascinating is how quickly they moved. The vote was in 1636. By 1637, the college was formally located in Newtown. And in 1638, the town, in honor of the English university where many of the colony's leaders had studied, renamed itself Cambridge. The new college was starting to take shape, but it was still just an idea, a plot of land and a pot of money. It lacked a name, a formal structure, and most importantly, a defining benefactor who could turn this ambitious dream into a tangible reality. This is where a young, unexpected figure enters our story. A man whose own life was cut tragically short, but whose legacy would become immortal. The college at Cambridge was on the verge of its first great leap forward, thanks to a surprising bequest that would give it not only a library and more funding, but also the name it carries to this day. And that's the story we'll be exploring in the next chapter. The story of John Harvard. This early commitment to higher education is a powerful testament to the values of the first colonists. They believed that the best way to secure their future was to invest in the minds of their children. It's a principle that shaped the development of the entire nation, establishing a precedent for public investment in education that continues to this day. The vote of 1636 wasn't just about building a single college. It was about embedding the pursuit of knowledge into the very DNA of a new society. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's incredible to think about how one decision, made by a small group of people nearly 400 years ago, set in motion a legacy of learning that has shaped the world. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do miss Chapter 4. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey. Today, we delve into Chapter 4. A story not of grand architecture or sprawling campuses, but of a humble, almost invisible beginning. Imagine this, a university with no university. No lecture halls with ivy-covered walls. No libraries filled with ancient books. No student union buzzing with activity. All of that was still a distant dream. So, where did the learning happen? Where did this grand vision first take root? The answer is as simple as it is profound. In the hearts and homes of the community. Early classes weren't held in purpose-built structures. Instead, picture a small group of eager students gathered in someone's living room, the air thick with the smell of brewing coffee and the excitement of new ideas. Picture them in community meeting halls, the same spaces used for town gatherings and Sunday socials, now transformed into temporary lecture rooms. Desks were likely dining tables, blackboards were whatever flat surface could be found, and the only admission fee was an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. This wasn't just about making do, it was about building something from scratch, fueled by sheer determination. Every lesson taught, every concept debated in these makeshift classrooms was an act of faith. Faith in the vision of the founders, faith in the potential of the students, and faith in the future. They were all building together, one small gathering at a time. The environment was one of shared struggle, but it was a struggle filled with an incredible sense of purpose. Think about the atmosphere. It wasn't sterile or formal. It was intimate, personal. The professor wasn't a distant figure on a stage, but a neighbor, a mentor, someone you'd share a meal with after the lesson was over. Students weren't just numbers in a register. They were a tight-knit family, bound by a common goal. They supported each other, learned from each other, and faced the uncertainties of this new venture together. This was education in its purest form, stripped of all pretense. Every day was a testament to resilience. Resources were scarce. Books were likely few and precious, passed from hand to hand until the pages were worn thin. There were no endowments, no wealthy benefactors. At least, not yet. The only capital they had was human capital. The unwavering dedication of the teachers and the raw ambition of the students. It was an environment of profound hope, a belief that even from the most modest of beginnings, something truly great could grow. This period wasn't just a placeholder until a real campus could be built. It was the crucible that forged the very soul of the institution. The values that would come to define the university community, perseverance, a focus on people over property, were all born in these humble settings. The struggle wasn't a setback, it was the foundation. It taught a lesson that no textbook ever could, that the true measure of an institution is UNT in its buildings, but in the strength of its spirit. The founders and early faculty weren't just educators, they were pioneers. They saw a need and, instead of waiting for the perfect conditions, they created the conditions themselves. They rolled up their sleeves and turned their own homes into hubs of learning. They invested their time, their energy, and what little money they had into a dream that many would have called impossible. This was the ultimate grassroots movement, powered by an unshakable belief in the transformative power of education. And the students, they were just as pioneering. They chose to attend a university that existed only as an idea. They placed their trust in this fledgling enterprise, embracing the challenges and the lack of amenities. They understood that they were part of something special, something they were helping to build with their own presence and participation. Their faith was the currency that kept the dream alive. So, when we look at the sprawling campus today, with its impressive buildings and modern facilities, it's crucial to remember this chapter. To remember that it all started with nothing more than a powerful idea and a handful of people who refused to believe it was impossible. It began in living rooms and meeting houses, in an atmosphere of struggle, faith, and unbreakable hope. This humble beginning is not a footnote in the university's history. It is the cornerstone upon which everything else was built. It's a powerful reminder that greatness often springs from the most unassuming of origins, proving that with enough passion and determination, you don't need a campus to build a community of learners. You just need a shared dream. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. I hope it gave you a new perspective on where this incredible institution came from. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what comes next in our journey. We'd love to have you with us. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our journey through the history of America's oldest university. In our last chapter, we saw the Massachusetts Bay Colony take a bold step. dedicating funds to establish a college to educate their future leaders. But a name, a soul, a true foundation, that was still missing. Today, we uncover the story of the man whose unexpected gift would forever shape the destiny of this fledgling institution. This is Chapter 5, The Gift of John Harvard. The year is 1637. The small settlement of Charlestown, just across the river from Boston, welcomes a new arrival from England. His name is John Harvard, a young, scholarly Puritan minister, barely 29 years old. He arrived with his wife, Anne, full of hope and ready to build a new life in a new world. He was a graduate of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, a place known for its Puritan learnings, and he brought with him a passion for learning and a deep, abiding faith. Upon his arrival, John Harvard was quickly recognized for his intellect and piety. He was admitted as a freeman of the colony and appointed as a teaching elder at the First Church of Charlestown. He was a respected figure, a man of books and contemplation. But his most significant contribution, the one that would echo through centuries, was yet to come. Born not of a long and storied life, but of a sudden, heartbreaking tragedy. The New England air, which promised freedom and a new beginning, proved harsh and unforgiving. The settlers faced constant threats from disease, and sanitation was rudimentary at best. Sadly, just a year after his arrival, in the late summer of 1638, John Harvard fell gravely ill with tuberculosis, a devastating and incurable disease at the time. His health declined rapidly. As he lay on his deathbed, a man who had barely had a chance to put down roots in this new land, his thoughts turned to the future not his own, but the colonies. He knew of the little college taking shape just a few miles away in Newtown. He understood its profound importance for preserving knowledge and faith for generations to come. And so, in his final act, John Harvard made a decision of extraordinary generosity. He dictated his will, bequeathing a stunning gift to the new school. He left half of his entire estate, a considerable sum of about £780, which was a fortune back then to the college. But his gift was more than just money. As a man of learning, his most prized possessions were his books. He also bequeathed his entire personal library, a collection of over 400 volumes. Now, 400 books might not sound like much today, when we can carry thousands on a single device, but in the 17th century, in a remote colonial outpost, this was a treasure beyond measure. Books were rare, expensive, and incredibly difficult to transport across the Atlantic. This collection, filled with classical literature, philosophy, theology, and science, instantly formed the core of the college's library, becoming its intellectual heart. Imagine the colonists' reaction. They were struggling to build a society from scratch, and here was this young man, practically a newcomer, who in his final moments had given so much to their shared dream. It was an act of faith in a future he would never see. The leaders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony were profoundly moved. This wasn't just a donation. It was a foundational act, a gesture that breathed life and substance into their ambitious project. In a meeting on March 13, 1639, the Great and General Court of Massachusetts made a decision. In gratitude for this incredible and timely gift, they voted to name the college in his honor. From that day forward, the school in Newtown would be known as Harvard College. Soon after, the town of Newtown itself was renamed Cambridge, a nod to the great English university where John Harvard and many of the coloniest leaders had been educated. So, the next time you hear the name Harvard, don't just think of an elite university. Think of a young minister from England. Think of John Harvard, who lived in America for only a year, but whose final, generous act of faith ensured that his name and his love for learning would live on for centuries. He was the founder in the traditional sense. He did undraft the charter or lay the first stone, but his gift, given at a critical moment, provided the resources and the inspiration that secured the college's survival and set it on its path to greatness. He is the patron saint, the spiritual founder, whose legacy is not built in brick and mortar, but in the spirit of giving and the pursuit of knowledge. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most enduring legacies are not the ones we plan, but the ones that arise from unexpected acts of generosity. Thank you for joining me for this chapter. If you've enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter, where we'll explore the early, challenging years of student life at Harvard College. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our journey through the history of Harvard University. Today, in Chapter 6, we re-witnessing the very birth of an institution that would shape the world, the founding of Harvard College between 1636 and 1638. So, grab your virtual quill and parchment, and let's step back into the fledgling Massachusetts Bay Colony. Picture this. It's 1636. The colony is less than a decade old, a rugged outpost on the edge of a vast, unknown continent. Life is a daily struggle for survival, yet, amidst the challenges of building homes, clearing fields, and establishing a new society, the Puritan leaders had a profound and forward-thinking concern: the future of their ministry and civil leadership. They knew that for their city upon a hill to endure, it needed an educated class, men who could interpret scripture and guide the community with wisdom. They couldn't rely forever on ministers trained back in England. They needed to cultivate their own intellectual soil. And so, on October 28, 1636, the Great and General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony made a momentous decision. They voted to establish a college, allocating a sum of £400 for its creation. This was an astonishing commitment equivalent to the colony's entire annual tax levy. It was a declaration that education wasn't a luxury, but a necessity, the very bedrock of their new world. The court appointed a board of overseers, consisting of leading magistrates and ministers, to bring this ambitious vision to life. The first challenge was location. The committee chose a spot called Newtown, a small but promising settlement just a few miles up the Charles River from Boston. It was considered a safe, defensible location, slightly removed from the bustling port of Boston, which they felt might be a source of distraction and temptation for young scholars. In a gesture of honor to the esteemed English university where many of the colony's leaders had studied, Newtown was soon renamed Cambridge. The stage was set, but a college is more than just a vote and a plot of land. It needs students, teachers, and a place to learn. The first master of the school, Nathaniel Eaton, was appointed in 1638. Eaton was a scholar, but by all accounts, a harsh and difficult man. He was tasked with overseeing the construction of the first college building and gathering the first class of students. This initial building, known as the Old College, was a modest, 2.5-story wooden structure. It was built in a style typical of the time, with a timber frame, likely clapboard siding, and a steeply pitched roof. Imagine a simple, functional building, more like a large farmhouse than the grand stone halls we associate with universities today. This first building was erected within a 1-acre cow yard, enclosed by a simple fence. This small plot of land was the very first iteration of what would become the legendary Harvard Yard. It wasn't the sprawling, leafy quad we know now. It was a working space. Livestock might have grazed nearby, and the ground would have been muddy and uneven. The building itself was multi-purpose. It housed classrooms, a dining hall, a library, and living quarters for the master and the handful of students in that first cohort. Life would have been Spartan. Rooms were likely small, cold in the winter, and lit by candlelight. The curriculum was rigorous and steeped in the classical tradition. Latin, Greek, Hebrew, logic, rhetoric, and, of course, theology. The goal was to train the mind and the soul, preparing young men for service to the church and the state. Despite its humble beginnings, this fenced-in cow yard immediately became something more than just a piece of property. It became the symbolic heart of the new school. It was the physical manifestation of the colony's highest aspirations. Within its simple fence, a new generation of leaders was being forged. This yard represented a protected space dedicated to intellectual and spiritual growth, a sanctuary for learning amidst the wilderness. The very act of enclosing the land signified its special purpose. It was a place set apart. However, the early days were fraught with difficulty. Master Eaton's tenure was short and disastrous. He was accused of mistreating students, and his wife was criticized for serving them foul food. In 1639, he was dismissed in disgrace and fled the colony. The fledgling college, barely a year into its operation, was on the verge of collapse. It seemed the grand experiment might fail before it had even truly begun. But then, an unexpected act of generosity changed everything. A young, Charlestown-based minister named John Harvard, who had arrived from England just a year earlier, passed away from tuberculosis. In his will, he left half of his considerable estate, around 780 pounds, his entire personal library of over 400 books, to the struggling college. This was a transformative gift. It more than doubled the colony's initial investment and provided the school with a magnificent library, a treasure trove of knowledge that formed the core of its collection. In gratitude for this saving grace, the General Court officially named the institution Harvard College in March of 1639. Joan Harvard's legacy was forever cemented, not as a founder in the administrative sense, but as its first and most crucial benefactor. His gift ensured the college's survival and gave it the resources and the name it carries to this day. The old college building stood as the centerpiece of the yard for decades, a testament to those early, difficult years. Though it was eventually torn down in 1679, its memory lives on, and so, by the end of 1638, the pieces were in place. A location in Cambridge, an official name, a board of overseers, and a foundational, albeit troubled, start. The small, fenced-in yard, with its single wooden building, was more than just a school. It was a symbol of hope, a bold investment in the future, and the beginning of an academic legacy that would stretch across centuries. The birth of Harvard was not a single event, but a series of determined, often difficult steps taken by people who believed, against all odds, in the power of education to build a better world. The symbolic heart of the university had begun to beat. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the early years of Harvard College are full of more drama, challenges, and incredible growth. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. We love hearing from you, so please leave your questions and thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the history of Harvard. Today, we're stepping back in time to meet the very first students who walked these hallowed grounds. Imagine it's the 1630s and 40s. A tiny college, just a single building and a president's house, sits in a muddy field in Newtown, soon to be renamed Cambridge. This was the humble beginning of Harvard, and its first students were about to embark on an extraordinary journey. So, who were these young pioneers? They weren't a diverse bunch by today's standards. They were all boys, some as young as their early teens. They came from the upper echelons of Puritan society, the sons of ministers, well-to-do merchants, and respected scholars. For these families, sending a son to Harvard was a profound statement of faith and ambition. It was about creating a new generation of educated leaders for the fledgling Massachusetts Bay Colony, men who would guide their communities in both spiritual and civil matters. Names like Danning, Saltonstall, and Mather would echo through the annals of New England history, and their journey started right here. Life for these first students was a world away from the college experience we know today. Their daily routine was governed by a strict, almost monastic rhythm. The day began before sunrise with the ringing of a bell, calling everyone to the college hall for morning prayers. This wasn't an optional activity. Attendance was mandatory. Following prayers, they would head straight into their first lessons. The curriculum was intensely classical, steeped in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. The goal was to read the Bible and other classical texts in their original languages. Logic, rhetoric, and arithmetic were also on the menu, all designed to sharpen the mind for theological debate, and after a simple midday meal, it was back to their studies, often with a tutor who oversaw their progress. There were no sprawling libraries or student centers. The library was a small collection of books, mostly theological texts, donated by patrons like John Harvard himself. Students would spend hours huddled over these precious volumes, often by candlelight, meticulously copying passages and preparing for recitations. The day would conclude, as it began, with evening prayers. This routine was relentless, designed to instill discipline and piety. There was very little room for idleness, which the Puritan ethos considered a sin. The entire structure of their day was a testament to the college's primary mission: to train a learned ministry. Discipline was severe. The college laws, known as the laws, liberties, and orders, were extensive and strictly enforced. Fines were levied for everything from missing prayers to speaking English when Latin was required. More serious offenses, like frequenting taverns or showing disrespect to a tutor, could result in public admonishment or even expulsion, a mark of great shame for a student and his family. The president and the tutors acted as moral guardians, responsible for the student's spiritual well-being as much as their intellectual development. This was a community where every action was scrutinized, and the pressure to conform to a high standard of conduct was immense. Beyond the rigors of study and prayer, life was simply hard. The 17th century New England climate was a formidable challenge. The winters were brutally cold, and the college buildings were drafty and difficult to heat. Fireplaces were the only source of warmth, and firewood was a precious commodity that students often had to procure themselves. Imagine trying to translate ancient Greek texts with numb fingers, your breath fogging in the frigid air of your shared chamber. Housing was another major issue. Students lived in cramped quarters, often 2 or 4 to a room, sometimes sharing a bed. Privacy was a luxury they did not have. These rooms were their dorms, their study spaces, and their social hubs, all in one. The close quarters meant that sickness could spread quickly, and with the limited medical knowledge of the time, even a common illness could be a serious threat. And what about the food? Forget about gourmet dining halls. The college commons served a monotonous and often meager diet. The staple was typically a porridge or stew, supplemented with bread and beer. Beer was a common part of the diet, as it was often safer to drink than the local water. The quality of the food was a constant source of complaint, leading to some of the earliest student protests in American history, known as the rebellions against the college steward. These weren't violent uprisings, but rather organized complaints about the bad and scanty commons. It's a timeless student grievance, connecting these 17th century scholars to students today. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, the strict discipline, and the demanding curriculum, these young men persevered. They were driven by a sense of purpose, a belief that they were laying the foundation for a new society, a city upon a hill. They formed intense bonds of friendship in their shared struggles, creating a network that would sustain them throughout their lives as they became the ministers, magistrates, and leaders of their communities. They were the first to answer the call of Harvard's early motto, Veritas, or truth, seeking it in their ancient texts and in the world around them. Their story is a powerful reminder of the resilience and determination that have defined this institution from its very first days. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into Harvard's past. The story of these first students is a testament to the enduring power of education and the human spirit. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, history buffs and curious minds. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of the past. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that shaped the very bedrock of early America: Puritan education. Have you ever wondered what it was like to go to school in the 17th century? What did they study? And more importantly, why? Get ready, because we're about to open the books on Chapter 8, the curriculum of faith. When we picture a colonial classroom, what comes to mind? Stern teachers, wooden benches, and perhaps a slate and chalk. While that's part of the picture, the real story lies in the curriculum itself. For the Puritans, education wasn't just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was a profoundly spiritual undertaking, a mission to forge the next generation of leaders in the crucible of faith. The core subjects might surprise you. They weren't focused on vocational skills, or what we'd call practical subjects today. Instead, the pillars of their educational system were Latin, Greek, theology, and logic. So, why this specific combination? Why spend years mastering ancient, dead languages? The answer lies at the heart of the Puritan worldview. Latin and Greek were not merely academic exercises. They were the keys to unlocking the original scriptures. To read the Bible in its untranslated, purest form was considered the highest intellectual and spiritual achievement. This wasn't just for pastors or theologians. For any educated man in the community, direct access to the Word of God was paramount. It allowed for personal interpretation, deep theological debate, and a direct, unmediated relationship with the sacred texts that governed every aspect of their lives. Imagine the dedication it took learning complex grammar and vast vocabularies, not for a grade, but for what they believed was the salvation of their souls. Alongside these classical languages was theology. This wasn't an elective, it was the central hub from which all other learning radiated. Students would spend countless hours studying scripture, memorizing catechisms, and debating intricate points of doctrine. They analyzed the works of great Protestant reformers like John Calvin, dissecting concepts like predestination, original sin, and covenant theology. This wasn't just rote memorization. The goal was to internalize these principles, to make them a part of their very being. The classroom was an extension of the church, a place where faith was intellectually fortified and rigorously tested. And what about logic? This might seem like the most secular subject of the four, but for the Puritans, it was the essential tool for defending that faith. Rooted in the classical traditions of Aristotle, logic taught students how to construct sound arguments, identify fallacies, and engage in reasoned debate. In a world where their beliefs were constantly under scrutiny, both from within and without their community, the ability to articulate and defend their faith logically was a vital skill. It was the intellectual armor a Puritan leader needed. Logic provided the framework to build a case for their worldview, to persuade others, and to ensure that their city upon a hill was built on a foundation of both spiritual conviction and intellectual rigor. So, if we combine these four pillars, Latin and Greek for accessing the source, theology for understanding the content, and logic for defending the belief, a clear picture emerges. The goal of Puritan education was not simply to create scholars. It was to create moral, God-fearing leaders. They believed that leadership required more than just worldly knowledge. It demanded a deep and abiding spiritual foundation. An educated man was expected to be a pillar of his community, not just in business or politics, but as a moral exemplar. The curriculum was meticulously designed to cultivate virtues like piety, discipline, humility, and a profound sense of duty to God and community. This brings us to a crucial point. For the Puritans, education was a dual journey. It was simultaneously an intellectual and a spiritual quest. There was no separation between the mind and the soul, between the secular and the sacred. Every lesson in grammar, every logical proof, every theological debate was seen as an act of worship, a way to better understand God and His creation. The pursuit of knowledge was a pathway to holiness. The university, like Harvard, founded in 1636, was established primarily to train ministers, ensuring a continuous supply of educated clergy who could guide their flocks with wisdom and theological soundness. The college motto, Veritas, or truth, was understood as divine truth, revealed through scripture and understood through reason. This educational model had a profound and lasting impact on American culture. It established a precedent for the importance of higher education and intellectualism in society. It instilled a cultural value on literacy, critical thinking, and civic responsibility. While the overtly religious focus has waned over the centuries, the core idea that education should serve a higher purpose to create citizens and ethical leaders still resonates in our discussions about education today. The Puritans believed that to be ignorant was to be vulnerable to temptation and sin. To be educated was to be armed, prepared, and enlightened. Think about the sheer intensity of this system. Young boys, often starting their Latin grammar as early as age 6 or 7, were immersed in this world of classical thought and intense religious doctrine. Their days were long and their studies demanding. There was little room for what we might consider creative play or self-expression in the modern sense. The curriculum was rigid, the expectations were high, and the ultimate goal was eternally significant. It was a system designed to mold character, to shape the soul, and to ensure the survival and prosperity of a community built entirely on a shared, deeply held faith. As we look back, it's easy to view this system as restrictive or narrow, and in many ways, it was. It was exclusive, primarily for boys of a certain social standing, and its scope was limited by its theological purpose. However, to truly understand it, we must see it through their eyes. In a harsh and uncertain world, education was a source of order, meaning, and hope. It was the mechanism by which they sought to build a more perfect society, a society guided by divine law and human reason, working in harmony. The curriculum of faith was their blueprint for the future. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of Puritan education. It's a fascinating window into a world so different from our own, yet one that laid the groundwork for so much of what came after. What do you think? Could our modern education system learn anything from this approach? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we're stepping back into the hallowed, yet formidable halls of early Harvard to meet the very first people entrusted with shaping the minds of its students. This is Chapter 9. The first teachers. Imagine a college with no president, no dean, just one man at the helm. That was the reality in the 1630s. The first person to hold the title of head or master of the fledgling college was a man named Nathaniel Eaton. Now, if you're picturing a wise, gentle scholar, you might want to adjust that image. Eaton was brilliant, no doubt, a skilled appraised who could lecture with the best of them, but his tenure was, to put it mildly, tumultuous. Eaton wasn't just a teacher. He was the master of the house, responsible for everything from academic instruction to the students' meals and living conditions. And this is where the trouble began. Stories from the time paint a grim picture. His wife was accused of serving spoiled fish and hasty pudding with goat dung in it. Yes, you heard that right. The students were not just intellectually challenged. They were often physically challenged by the food. But the food was just the start. Eaton's methods of discipline were notoriously severe. He believed in the old adage, "Spare the rod and spoil the child," and he applied it with vigor. The Puritan belief system of the time held that a child's will needed to be broken to make way for piety and obedience. Eaton took this to an extreme. One account tells of him beating his own assistant, Nathaniel Briscoe, with a walnut tree cudgel for over 2 hours. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was a brutal, public display of authority. When students stepped out of line and the rules were incredibly rigid, they could expect similar treatment. The rules governed every aspect of their lives. They were to speak Latin at all times, rise before the sun for prayers, and maintain a somber, pious demeanor. Infractions like lying, missing prayers, or visiting a tavern could result in fines, public confession, or the dreaded flogging. It was an environment of intense pressure, where academic rigor was inseparable from strict moral and physical discipline. The outcry over Eaton's cruelty, especially the beating of his assistant and the general neglect of the students, led to his dismissal in 1639 after only about a year in charge. He was fined, excommunicated from the church in Cambridge, and he fled the colony, eventually dying in a debtor's prison in England. A rather dramatic end for Harvard's first leader. His short, chaotic reign nearly brought the young college to its knees before it had even truly begun. After Eaton's disastrous tenure, the colony knew it needed a change. They appointed Henry Dunster, a man who would become the first official president. Dunster was a different kind of leader, still strict, but far more dedicated to building a true institution of learning. He, along with a small group of tutors, began to formalize the curriculum. Education under Dunster and the early tutors was a formidable affair. The curriculum was deeply rooted in the classical tradition, what we now call the liberal arts. Students spent their days immersed in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. They studied logic, rhetoric, ethics, and metaphysics. Science, or natural philosophy as it was then known, involved studying the works of Aristotle. The goal wasn't to prepare for a specific career in the modern sense, but to create a well-rounded, virtuous, and godly man, capable of leading in the church or the state. The tutors themselves were often recent graduates, young men who lived in the college alongside the students. They were more than just lecturers, they were mentors and disciplinarians. They oversaw recitations, where students had to recite, from memory, long passages from classical texts. The pressure to perform was immense. There were no multiple-choice tests here. Education was a public performance, and failure was a public shame. This combination of rigorous academics and strict moral oversight defined the early Harvard experience. It was a world away from the modern university. The belief was that knowledge without character was dangerous. Therefore, the development of a student's soul was just as important, if not more so, than the development of their intellect. Every lesson in logic was also a lesson in divine order. Every passage of Cicero was an exercise in virtue. This educational philosophy, while harsh by our standards, laid the foundation for an institution that would endure for centuries. The emphasis on a broad, classical education and the development of character are ideas that, in some form, still echo in discussions about higher education today. The first teachers, with all their flaws and severity, were true pioneers. They were building something from scratch, guided by a powerful vision of what an educated person should be. They weren't just teaching subjects. They were attempting to forge souls, creating the future leaders of a new world. One difficult Latin verse and one harsh lesson at a time. These early years were a trial by fire for both the students and the institution itself. The story of Nathaniel Eden serves as a stark reminder of how close Harvard came to failure. But through the dedication of men like Henry Dunster and the unnamed tutors who followed, the college survived and began to build the legacy we know today. The path was anything but smooth, paved with strict rules, severe punishments, and an unwavering commitment to a deeply moral, classical education. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Harvard's formative years. It's a fascinating, and sometimes shocking, look at the roots of American higher education. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do you and me's the next chapter in our series. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts on this style of education. See you next time. Welcome back to our series on the history of Harvard. Today, we are rediving deep into a side of the university you might not expect. Its incredibly close ties to the Puritan church. When we think of Harvard now, we picture a global hub of secular learning, but its roots are planted firmly in religious soil. Let's explore Chapter 10. Harvard and the Church. In the 1630s, the Puritans who settled in Massachusetts Bay Colony weren't just building new towns. They were building a new society, a city upon a hill, guided by their faith. But they had a problem. Their religious leaders, many educated at Cambridge and Oxford in England, were aging. Who would take their place? They feared a future where their churches would be led by an uneducated ministry, unable to interpret the scriptures or defend their faith. This fear was the driving force behind Harvard College's founding in 1636. Its primary mission was unjust education for education's sake. It was to ensure a continuous supply of literate, learned ministers who could uphold the Puritan way. The college's famous motto, Veritas, which means truth. Was originadi veritas Christo, et ecclesia truth, for Christ and the Church. That tells you everything you need to know about its original purpose. Harvard was created to be a bulwark against ignorance and a training ground for the defenders of the faith. So, what did this look like in practice? The connection between the college and the church was woven into the very fabric of daily life. The college presidents, from Henry Dunster to Increase Mather, were all prominent ministers. The board of overseers, which governed the college, was composed of local ministers and magistrates. Essentially, the church and the state, through the college, worked hand in hand to shape the colony's future leaders. This religious mission dictated the entire curriculum. While students learned classical subjects like Latin, Greek, and logic, it was all in service of a greater goal. Theology, the ability to read the Bible in its original languages, Hebrew and Greek, was paramount. Logic and rhetoric weren't just for intellectual exercise. They were tools for constructing sermons and debating theological points. Science, or natural philosophy as it was called, was seen as a way to understand God's creation and marvel at his handiwork. Every subject pointed back to God. Student life was also rigorously controlled by Puritan values. The day began and ended with prayer. Students were required to attend services at the First Parish in Cambridge. The local church, the college rules were strict, governing everything from dress code to personal conduct, all designed to mold students into pious, disciplined, and morally upright gentlemen. There was no separation between their academic life and their spiritual life. They were one and the same. A student's progress was measured not just by his academic performance, but by his spiritual maturity and devotion. Morning prayers were mandatory, often held before sunrise in a cold, unaided hole. Students were expected to read the scriptures twice a day and were regularly quizzed on the Sunday sermon. Any deviation from these strict religious observances could result in fines, public admonishment, or even expulsion. The atmosphere was one of intense spiritual and intellectual discipline. The goal was to produce men who were not only learned, but also deeply pious, ready to lead their congregations and uphold the Puritan social order. This system produced generations of ministers who fanned out across New England, founding new churches and sustaining the Puritan vision. For the first several decades of its existence, over half of Harvard's graduates entered the ministry. They were the intellectual and spiritual backbone of the colonies. Their sermons shaped public opinion, and their leadership guided their communities through difficult times. Harvard was, in effect, the intellectual heart of New England Puritanism. However, this tight bond between Harvard and the church wouldn't last forever. As the 17th century turned into the 18th, new ideas from the Enlightenment began to sweep in from Europe. Concepts like reason, individualism, and religious tolerance started to challenge the old Puritan orthodoxy. These new intellectual currents inevitably found their way into the halls of Harvard. Tensions began to emerge between the more conservative, traditionalist faction and a more liberal, progressive wing within the faculty and the board. Debates over theology and the nature of the church grew more frequent and more heated. The Great Awakening, a series of religious revivals in the 1730s and 40s, further complicated things, creating rifts between old lights who favored the established order and new lights who emphasized a more personal, emotional faith. By the early 18th century, the college was becoming a battleground for the soul of New England. While it was still officially committed to its Christian mission, the definition of that mission was changing. The curriculum began to broaden, placing more emphasis on secular subjects and preparing students for careers beyond the church, such as law and medicine. The once monolithic Puritan control was beginning to fracture. This shift marked the beginning of Harvard's long, slow journey towards secularization. It didn't happen overnight, but the seeds of change planted in the early 1700s would eventually grow to transform the college completely. The close, symbiotic relationship between Harvard and the Puritan Church, which had defined its first century, was starting to unravel. The college that was founded to preserve a specific religious orthodoxy was now becoming a place where that very orthodoxy was being questioned and debated, and that's where we'll leave it for today. The story of Harvard is a fascinating look at how an institution founded for one specific purpose can evolve over time into something its founders might barely recognize. The transition from a Puritan seminary to a global, secular university is a central theme in its history, and it all began with these early challenges to the old religious order. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this gave you a new perspective on Harvard's origins. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter in our series. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome back to our series diving deep into the history of Harvard. Today, in Chapter 11, we're turning the clock all the way back to a pivotal moment. The very first graduation. It's a story that's smaller in scale than you might imagine, but its impact was absolutely monumental. So, grab your virtual gowns and caps, because we're about to meet the class of 1642. Picture this. It's 1642. The Massachusetts Bay Colony is still a rugged, developing settlement. Life is hard, and the future is uncertain. In the midst of this, a tiny college, just 6 years old, is about to celebrate its first ever commencement. Forget the thousands of graduates we see today. This graduating class was made up of just 9 young men. 9. It's almost hard to believe, isn't it? These weren't just students. They were pioneers. They were the first fruits of an ambitious experiment to create an educated leadership for a new world. So, who were these 9 individuals? Their names might not be as famous as some of Harvard's later alumni, like presidents or tech billionaires, but in their time, they were destined for greatness. The curriculum they endured was incredibly rigorous, focused heavily on classical languages like Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, as well as logic, ethics, and theology. The primary goal of Harvard at the time was to train ministers. The colonists were deeply religious, and they feared a future where their churches would be led by an uneducated ministry. They had seen it happen in England and were determined to prevent it in America. So, these 9 graduates were essentially the first line of defense against what they called an illiterate ministry. Their education was designed to make them not just preachers, but intellectual and spiritual leaders for their communities. Imagine the pressure on their shoulders. They were the test case. If they failed, the entire project of Harvard could have been seen as a failure. The hopes and dreams of the colony's leaders rested on their success. And succeed they did. Upon graduating, these men scattered throughout the New England colonies, and their influence began to spread immediately. Most of them, as intended, went on to become respected ministers. Take, for example, James Ward, who served as a pastor, or Samuel Bellingham, son of the colonial governor. Their Harvard education gave them the authority and the intellectual tools to guide their congregations, interpret scripture, and provide moral leadership in rapidly growing towns. They weren't just giving sermons on Sunday. They were central figures in the community. They were counselors, mediators, and educators themselves. They helped settle disputes, advised on town matters, and often were the most learned individuals for miles around. But their impact wasn't confined to the pulpit. The education they received was broad enough to prepare them for leadership in all aspects of colonial life. Several of these early graduates took on significant civic roles. They became magistrates, colonial agents, and leaders in local government. This is a crucial point. Harvard wasn't just creating clergymen. It was creating a colonial elite. It was forging the intellectual backbone of a new society. These graduates were men who could think critically, argue persuasively, and lead with a sense of purpose and a foundation in classical learning. They were shaping the laws, the political discourse, and the very culture of New England. This is what we call the ripple effect. Think about it. From just 9 students in a single class, a network of influence began to form. When one of these graduates established a church in a new settlement, they brought with them not just their faith, but the values of education, civic duty, and intellectual rigor that were instilled in them at Harvard. When another served in a colonial assembly, his decisions were informed by his training in logic and ethics. They became role models, inspiring other families to send their sons to Harvard, ensuring a continuous flow of educated leaders. Each graduate was like a stone tossed into a pond. The initial splash was their direct work as a minister or a leader. But the ripples that spread out were far more significant. They helped establish new schools, shaping education for the next generation. They participated in the great theological and political debates of their day. Their letters and sermons were circulated, influencing public opinion. They were, in effect, building the intellectual infrastructure of America. The very idea that a leader should be educated and morally upright was powerfully reinforced by the presence of these Harvard men in communities across the colonies. This first class set a precedent. For the next century and beyond, Harvard graduates would continue to fill the most important roles in colonial society. They were the ministers, the doctors, the lawyers, the governors, and the revolutionaries. When you trace the lineage of American leadership back to its earliest days, you find the footprints of these first 9 graduates and the classes that followed them. They proved that a small college in the wilderness could produce leaders capable of building a nation. The legacy of the class of 1642 isn't just about 9 diplomas. It is about the foundation of a society that valued education as the cornerstone of a free and prosperous future. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest beginnings can lead to the most profound and lasting change. And that's the incredible story of Harvard's first graduating class. It's a testament to the vision of its founders and the dedication of its earliest students. What started with just 9 scholars in 1642 has grown into a global institution, but its core mission of educating leaders who make a difference in the world remains. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next chapter. We have so many more stories to uncover. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. In the last chapter, we celebrated the founding of our beloved college, a beacon of hope and ambition. But as any great story will tell you, the beginning is often the easiest part. Today, we delve into Chapter 12, a period primera calle, growing pains and expansion. This was a time when the very existence of the college hung precariously in the balance. Imagine this. You've built your dream, laid the foundation, and opened the doors. The first students are walking the halls, their minds eager to learn. But behind the scenes, a storm is brewing. Almost immediately, the college was plunged into a desperate struggle for funding. The initial enthusiasm that fueled its creation began to wane in the face of harsh economic realities. Every dollar was a battle, every budget a puzzle, with missing pieces. Leaders spent more time fundraising and pleading for support than they did on academic development. It was a constant, draining fight just to keep the lights on. And if the financial strain wasn't enough, political tensions began to surface. In a young and developing region, everything becomes political, and education is no exception. Different factions within the local government had conflicting ideas about the college's direction, its curriculum, and even its right to exist. Some saw it as a vital asset, while others viewed it as a drain on public resources. These external pressures created a whirlwind of uncertainty. Debates raged in town halls and newspaper columns, turning the college into a political football. This constant scrutiny made long-term planning nearly impossible and tested the resolve of everyone involved. Internally, the pressure cooker environment led to significant leadership challenges. The founding board, once a united force, began to show cracks. Disagreements over how to navigate the financial and political crises led to heated arguments and fractured relationships. Key figures, exhausted and disheartened, considered stepping away. The vision that had once burned so brightly was now clouded by infighting and doubt. It's a classic tale of success breeding new, more complex problems. The very growth they had prayed for was now threatening to tear them apart from the inside. How do you lead when you can barely agree on the path forward? There were moments, dark and desperate moments, when the doors of the college were on the verge of closing for good. I'm not exaggerating when I say it nearly collapsed. Not just once, but several times. Picture a letter being drafted to inform students that their studies could not continue. Imagine the board meeting late into the night, looking at ledgers that were deep in the red, with no clear path to solvency. Creditors were calling, supplies were running low, and morale had hit rock bottom. At one point, a crucial state grant was vetoed at the last minute, a political maneuver that almost delivered the final blow. It felt like every step forward was met with two giant steps back. The dream was turning into a nightmare. So, with overwhelming financial debt, political opposition, and internal division, how did the college survive? What pulled it back from the brink, time and time again? The answer is as simple as it is profound. The community. When the formal channels of support failed, the people stepped up. Local farmers would donate produce to the college cafeteria. The town's blacksmith would repair campus equipment for free. Families would open their homes to students who couldn't afford lodging. Small, anonymous cash donations would appear, just enough to cover a critical bill. It was a grassroots movement fueled by an unwavering belief in the college's mission. This support wasn't just material, it was spiritual. The community. As faith was the invisible scaffolding that held the college together when its own foundations were crumbling. They saw the college not just as a collection of buildings, but as the heart of their town and the key to their children's future. This deep-seated faith gave the college's beleaguered leaders the strength to carry on. It reminded them that they weren't fighting alone. Every prayer, every word of encouragement, every small act of kindness was a testament to the fact that their work mattered. It was this powerful combination of community support and shared faith that became the college's lifeline. This period of intense struggle, of near failure, ultimately forged the college's identity. It taught a crucial lesson that an institution is more than its finances or its political standing. It is a living entity, sustained by the people who believe in it. The growing pains were excruciating, but they forced the college to deepen its roots within the community, creating a bond that would prove to be unbreakable. The challenges didn't break the college. They made it stronger, more resilient, and more deeply cherished than ever before. This chapter of near collapse became the bedrock of its enduring legacy. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of the journey. The story of our college is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found in the strength of community and the power of faith. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear what happens next, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you next time as we explore the next chapter in this incredible story. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, history buffs and knowledge seekers. Today, we're diving deep into the heart of early American intellect, a place where the seeds of a nation's mind were sown. We're exploring Chapter 13 of our journey, the Harvard Library. Picture this. It's 1638. The New World is a rugged, sprawling frontier. Cities are fledgling settlements, and the wilderness is vast and untamed. In this environment, survival is paramount. But a small group of colonists in Massachusetts Bay believes that for a society to truly thrive, it needs more than just food and shelter. It needs knowledge. It needs a mind. And that's where a young minister named John Harvard steps onto the stage of history. His name is now synonymous with the university, but his most immediate, tangible gift wasn't land or a grand vision. It was his personal library. When John Harvard passed away, he bequeathed his collection of around 400 books to the newly established college. Now, 400 books might not sound like a lot to us today, surrounded as we are by digital libraries and overflowing bookstores. But in 17th century colonial America, this was a treasure beyond measure. Books were incredibly expensive and difficult to transport across the treacherous Atlantic. Each volume was a vessel, carrying the accumulated wisdom of the old world theology, philosophy, classical literature, science, and history. John Harvard's donation was the cornerstone. It wasn't just a collection. It was the lifeblood of the fledgling institution. These books were the tools that would shape the minds of the colony's future leaders, ministers, and scholars. In a land with so few resources, where every nail and every pane of glass was precious, this library was an intellectual goldmine. It was a statement that this new society would be built not just on faith and hard work, but on rigorous intellectual pursuit. The arrival of these books transformed the college. Suddenly, it had a core, a center of gravity. The library became the single most important building on campus, the nucleus around which all academic life orbited. It was more than a storage room for texts. It was the engine of learning for the entire colony, for the students and tutors at Harvard. This collection was their connection to the great conversation of Western thought, stretching back through the Reformation, the Renaissance, and all the way to ancient Greece and Rome. Think about the sheer power of that. A young student, perhaps the son of a farmer or a craftsman, could walk into this modest library and engage with the ideas of Plato, Augustine, or Calvin. He could study the latest scientific discoveries from Europe or debate theological points using texts that were centuries old. This library was a portal, a bridge across time and space. It ensured that the intellectual traditions of Europe were not lost in the wilderness of America, but were instead replanted and cultivated in new soil. The library's importance grew with every passing year. It attracted further donations from patrons in both America and England who wanted to support this beacon of learning in the colonies. The collection expanded, becoming the most significant repository of knowledge in British North America. When you wanted to know something, anything, from legal precedent to medical treatments to the orbits of the planets, you went to the Harvard Library. It was the Google of its day, the central nervous system of colonial intellectual life. It was here that the ideas that would eventually fuel the American Revolution were studied and debated. The concepts of liberty, governance, and the rights of man weren't invented in a vacuum. They were nurtured in places like this. Through the careful reading and interpretation of texts housed within the library's walls, the intellectual firepower for a new nation was being forged, one book, one reader at a time. The story of the original Harvard Library is also a story of vulnerability. In 1764, a catastrophic fire swept through Harvard Hall, destroying almost the entire collection, including nearly all of John Harvard's original donation. Only about 100 books that were checked out at the time survived. The loss was devastating, a cultural cataclysm for the colonies. It was seen as a national tragedy, but the response to this disaster is perhaps the most telling part of the story. Instead of despair, there was a massive, collective effort to rebuild. Donations poured in from across the colonies and from Britain. People understood what had been lost, not just books, but the soul of their intellectual community. The swift and passionate campaign to rebuild the library demonstrated just how central it had become to the identity and future of colonial America. So, when we think of the founding of Harvard, it's crucial to remember that it began with a library. It began with the belief that a collection of books was a necessary foundation for a new world. John Harvard's gift was an act of profound optimism, a bet on the future of a society dedicated to learning. The library he founded became the crucible where the American mind was formed, proving that in a world of scarcity, the most valuable resource of all is knowledge. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into America's intellectual roots. If you found this fascinating, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We have so much more history to uncover together. See you next time. Hello and welcome back to our deep dive into the history of Harvard University. Last time, we explored its Puritan roots, a college founded primarily to train ministers and ensure a learned clergy for the New World. But as the 17th century gave way to the 18th, a seismic shift was happening across the Atlantic, a tidal wave of new ideas that would soon crash upon the shores of New England and reshape Harvard forever. This is the story of Harvard and the Enlightenment. Imagine a world where faith was the ultimate authority, where the Bible was the primary text for understanding not just God, but nature, society, and humanity itself. This was the world into which Harvard was born. Its early curriculum was steeped in theology, classical languages, and logic, all designed to defend and propagate Puritan doctrine. But by the late 1600s, the intellectual winds began to change. In Europe, thinkers like Isaac Newton, John Locke, and Voltaire were championing a new way of understanding the universe, one based not solely on divine revelation, but on reason, observation, and empirical evidence. This was the Enlightenment, the age of reason, and its influence was inescapable. News, books, and scientific instruments began to flow from London to Boston, carrying these revolutionary ideas into the heart of colonial society. At Harvard, this created a fascinating tension. The college was still deeply committed to its religious mission, but its students and faculty were increasingly captivated by the power of science and philosophy. They started asking new questions. Could the natural world be understood through mathematical laws? Was government based on a social contract between people rather than a divine mandate? This intellectual ferment began to bubble up within Harvard's hallowed halls. The curriculum, once rigid and theologically centered, started to slowly, almost imperceptibly, expand. One of the most significant changes was the growing importance of natural philosophy, what we would today call science. Professors began to teach Newton's laws of motion and his theory of universal gravity. Students were no longer just reading scripture. They were conducting experiments, observing celestial events through telescopes, and studying the principles of physics and astronomy. A key figure in this transition was Professor John Winthrop, the fourth not to be confused with the first governor of colony. Appointed the Hollis Professor of Mathematics and Natural Philosophy in 1738, Winthrop was a true Enlightenment man. He was a brilliant scientist who corresponded with the likes of Benjamin Franklin and members of the Royal Society in London. He established one of the first laboratories for experimental physics in America right at Harvard. He led an expedition to Newfoundland to observe the transit of Venus, a major international scientific event. Through his teaching and public lectures, Winthrop demonstrated that faith and reason were not enemies. He showed a generation of students that one could be a devout Christian while also embracing the scientific method to understand God's creation. The universe, in this new view, was a complex, beautiful machine, governed by rational laws that could be discovered by the human mind. Philosophy also underwent a profound transformation. The works of John Locke were particularly influential. His ideas about natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and his theory that the human mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate shaped by experience, challenged traditional notions of innate sin and divinely ordained social hierarchies. These concepts were radical, and they were debated fiercely in Harvard's classrooms. Tutors and students grappled with questions about the nature of government, the rights of individuals, and the source of political authority. This wasn't just abstract academic exercise. These were the very ideas that would fuel the American Revolution a few decades later. The library, the intellectual heart of the college, reflected this change. Its shelves once dominated by theological tomes, began to fill with the works of Enlightenment thinkers. Books on science, history, politics, and modern philosophy became essential reading. The library became a window to a wider world of learning, exposing students to a diversity of thought that would have been unimaginable a century earlier. This expansion of knowledge didn't necessarily mean a rejection of religion. For many, it was about finding a new synthesis, a way to reconcile faith with the discoveries of reason. They believed that by studying the natural world and human society, they were gaining a deeper appreciation for the wisdom of the Creator. However, this transition was not without conflict. There were traditionalists who viewed the new learning with suspicion, fearing it would lead to skepticism and undermine religious faith. The tension between the old guard and the new thinkers, between piety and reason, played out in faculty appointments and curriculum debates for decades. Yet, the tide was irreversible. By the mid-1700s, Harvard was no longer just a seminary. It was evolving into a modern university, an institution dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge in all its forms. This transformation had a profound impact that reached far beyond the college yard. As Harvard graduates fanned out across the colonies, they took these new ideas with them. They became ministers who preached a more rational and tolerant form of Christianity. They became lawyers and politicians who used Lockean principles to argue for colonial rights and, eventually, for independence. Figures like John Adams, John Hancock, and Samuel Adams, all Harvard men, were products of this new intellectual environment. They were trained to think critically, to argue from evidence, and to believe in the power of reason to shape a better society. In this way, the intellectual revolution that took place at Harvard became a crucial ingredient in the political revolution that created the United States of America. So, as we look back, we see that the Enlightenment didn't destroy Harvard's religious foundations. It built upon them. It expanded the college's mission from training ministers for the church to educating leaders for the new nation. It instilled a spirit of inquiry, a commitment to intellectual freedom, and a belief in the power of knowledge to improve the human condition, values that continue to define the university to this day. The transition was complex and often contentious, but it was essential. It turned a small colonial college into a powerhouse of American thought, setting the stage for its future as a world-leading institution. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Harvard's history. I hope you found this chapter as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next episode, where we'll explore Harvard's role in the American Revolution. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the history of Harvard. Today, we're diving into Chapter 15, From Colony to Nation. This is a pivotal moment, not just for America, but for Harvard itself, as the revolutionary spirit sweeping through the colonies found a powerful echo within the university's hallowed halls. So, how did a college, founded under a royal charter, become a hotbed for revolution? Let's find out. As tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain reached a boiling point in the 1760s and 70s, Harvard was far from a silent observer. The institution, which had for over a century educated the sons of New England's elite, became a crucible where the ideas of liberty, rights, and self-governance were passionately debated and forged. The curriculum, steeped in classical studies of Greek and Roman republics and the Enlightenment philosophies of thinkers like John Locke, provided the intellectual ammunition for the revolutionary generation. Students weren't just reading about freedom, they were discussing what it meant for them, right here in Cambridge. Imagine the atmosphere on campus. The air was electric. In common rooms, dining halls, and over candlelight in their dormitories, students debated the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Intolerable Acts. They weren't just academic exercises. These were infringements on their own lives and futures. The spirit of defiance was so strong that commencement ceremonies became platforms for patriotic orations. Students chose topics for their theses that were thinly veiled critiques of British policy, championing the rights of the governed and challenging the authority of the crown. The college was no longer just an institution of learning. It was becoming a symbol of intellectual resistance. When the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, just a few miles from campus, the theoretical became terrifyingly real. The war arrived literally on Harvard's doorstep. The university was forced to shut down, and the students were sent home. But the campus itself was not abandoned. Instead, it was transformed into a military barracks for the Continental Army. Imagine General George Washington, who had just taken command of the army on Cambridge Common, walking through Harvard Yard, with about 1,600 colonial soldiers quartered in Massachusetts Hall, Harvard Hall, and Hollis Hall. The college library was moved for safekeeping, and the philosophical apparatus, scientific instruments, were packed away. Harvard had officially enlisted in the cause of independence. This commitment wasn't just institutional, it was deeply personal. A remarkable number of Harvard men answered the call to arms. Students left their studies to join the militia, and alumni from across the colonies took on leadership roles. Perhaps the most famous is John Adams, class of 1755, a brilliant lawyer and a fiery voice for independence. Adams was a key figure in the Continental Congress and one of the drafters of the Declaration of Independence. His classmate, John Hancock, class of 1754, would become the president of the Second Continental Congress and the first to sign the Declaration with his famously bold signature. His name became synonymous with signing your name, but the list goes on. There was Samuel Adams, class of 1740, the master propagandist and organizer of the Sons of Liberty. Joseph Warren, class of 1759, a respected doctor who became a major general and tragically lost his life at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Elbridge Garry, class of 1762, another signer of the Declaration and future vice president, and James Otis, Jr., class of 1743, whose powerful arguments against the writs of assistance years earlier had lit one of the first sparks of revolution. He famously declared, "Taxation without representation is tyranny," a sentiment that had been debated and internalized by a generation of Harvard students. These weren't just abstract figures from a history book. They were Harvard men, shaped by the education and the environment they experienced right here. The college itself symbolized the very ideals the revolution was fought for, the freedom of thought and the pursuit of truth. For decades, Harvard had fostered an environment of critical inquiry. It taught its students not what to think, but how to think. This intellectual freedom was a direct challenge to the rigid, hierarchical authority represented by the British monarchy. The Crown expected loyalty and obedience from its colonial institutions. Instead, Harvard produced men who questioned that authority, debated its legitimacy, and ultimately led a successful charge to overthrow it. The college demonstrated that an educated citizenry, armed with reason and a belief in their natural rights, could fundamentally change the world. Even during the war, the leaders of Massachusetts understood Harvard's importance. While the Continental Army occupied its buildings, the college was temporarily relocated to Concord. The government knew that the future of the new nation depended not just on winning the war, but on educating the next generation of leaders who would build and sustain the Republic. In 1780, in the midst of the conflict, the Massachusetts Constitution was drafted largely by John Adams, and it included a special section, Chapter 5, specifically dedicated to the University of Cambridge. This act cemented Harvard's status, transforming it from a colonial college into the university of a new, free commonwealth. It was a powerful statement about the central role of education in a self-governing society. When the war finally ended and the United States was born, Harvard alumni were at the forefront of building the new nation. 8 Harvard men were signers of the Declaration of Independence. Dozens served in the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. They became governors, judges, diplomats. And, of course, 2 of the first 6 U.S. presidents were John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams. Harvard class of 1787 university's influence was woven into the very fabric of the new republic as the principles of liberty and self-governance, nurtured in the classrooms of Cambridge, were now being put into practice on a national scale. So, as we look back, Chapter 15 is a story of transformation. It's the story of how a college, founded to train ministers for a Puritan colony, evolved into a powerful engine for revolutionary thought and action. It is a testament to the power of ideas and the courage of individuals who were willing to risk everything for the cause of freedom. Harvard's role in the American Revolution wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a defining chapter that shaped the destiny of both the university and the nation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a crucial period of Harvard's history. It's a powerful reminder that institutions of learning can be forces for profound change. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue exploring this incredible story with us, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're rejourneying to the heart of one of the world's most prestigious universities to unravel a story of monuments, myths, and the enduring legacy of a man named John Harvard. If you've ever walked through Harvard Yard, you've likely seen it. The iconic bronze statue of a seated figure, a popular spot for tourists and students alike. But what if I told you that this famous landmark is built on a foundation of famous falsehoods? Stick around, because we're about to uncover the 3 lies of the John Harvard statue. First, let's talk about the man himself. John Harvard was a real person. An English minister who lived in Charlestown, Massachusetts in the 17th century. When he passed away in 1638, he made a remarkable bequest. He left half of his estate, around 780 pounds, a significant sum back then, and his entire library of about 400 books to a fledgling college that had been founded just 2 years earlier. In gratitude for this transformative gift, the Great and General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony decided to name the institution Harvard College. So, while he wasn't the founder, his generosity was the critical seed that allowed the college to survive and eventually flourish. He was its first major benefactor, a cornerstone of its very existence. Now, let's turn our attention to that famous statue. It was created by sculptor Daniel Chester French, the very same artist who later designed the magnificent Abraham Lincoln statue at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The statue was unveiled in 1884, and it sits imposingly in Harvard Yard, its left shoe famously polished to a golden shine from the countless hands that have rubbed it for good luck. The inscription on its granite base reads, John Harvard, founder 1638. Simple, direct, and ... completely wrong. This brings us to the first of the 3 lies. Lie number 1. The statue is not of John Harvard. Surprising, right? When Daniel Chester French was commissioned to create the sculpture in the late 19th century, there was a major problem. No one knew what John Harvard actually looked like. Not a single portrait, sketch, or even a written description of his appearance had survived the centuries. So, what's a sculptor to do? French needed a model. He found his inspiration in a handsome Harvard student named Sherman Hoare from the class of 1882. So, the distinguished figure you see immortalized in bronze is, in fact, an idealized representation of a 19th century student, not the 17th century minister himself. It's a face chosen to embody the scholarly ideal, not to depict a historical reality. Now for lie number 2, which is right there in the inscription. Founder. As we discussed earlier, John Harvard was not the founder of the university. Harvard College was officially founded in 1636 by a vote of the Great and General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Its mission was to train ministers for the new colony. John Harvard's pivotal contribution came 2 years later. In 1638, his donation was so substantial that it ensured the college's survival and set a precedent for philanthropy that continues to this day. So, while he wasn't the founder, you could call him the university's founding benefactor. The inscription simplifies history, giving all the credit to one man when it was really a collective effort, followed by a crucial, game-changing act of generosity. This leads us to the 3rd and final lie. Also on the inscription, the date, 1638. This is the year John Harvard died and made his bequest, and the year the college was named after him. However, as we've established, the college itself was founded 2 years earlier, in 1636. So, the date on the statue marks the moment of Harvard's naming, not its establishment. The 3 lies are so well known among the Harvard community that tour guides affectionately referred to the statue as the Statue of 3 Lies. It's a classic campus joke, a piece of lore passed down from one generation of students to the next. So, if the statue is built on these inaccuracies, why does it matter? Why has this figure, this myth, become so powerful? The answer lies in what it represents. The statue isn't just about a man. It's about an ideal. It embodies the spirit of learning, ambition, and the pursuit of knowledge that defines Harvard University. The idealized face of Sherman Hoare became the face of every student who has walked those hallowed grounds, filled with dreams and a desire to make their mark on the world. The polished shoe isn't just rubbed for good luck. It's a physical connection to a tradition of excellence, a tangible link to generations of scholars, leaders, and innovators who came before. The myth of John Harvard. The benevolent founder inspired a culture of giving back. His single act of philanthropy set a powerful example. For centuries, alumni and benefactors have followed in his footsteps, donating time, money, and resources to ensure that the university continues to thrive. The legacy isn't just in the name, it's in the very DNA of the institution, a commitment to advancing knowledge and serving society, fueled by the generosity of those who believe in its mission. The story of John Harvard teaches us that a single act of kindness, a single gift, can have an impact that echoes through centuries, shaping the future in ways one could never imagine. In a way, the three lies make the statue even more compelling. It is a reminder that history is often more complex and nuanced than the stories we carve in stone. It teaches us to look beyond the surface, to question what we see, and to understand the deeper truths that legends are built upon. The statue may not be factually accurate in its details, but it is emotionally and symbolically true to the spirit of Harvard. It represents the journey of a small colonial college transformed into a global beacon of education, all thanks to a foundational act of generosity from a man whose face we'll never know, but whose legacy is immortal. The man, John Harvard, gave his books and his fortune. The myth, the statue of John Harvard, gives inspiration. It stands as a silent testament to the idea that our greatest contributions often live on long after we are gone, shaping institutions and inspiring people for generations to come. So, the next time you see a picture of this famous statue, you'll know the real story. You'll know about Sherman Hoare, the true founding date, and the man who was a benefactor, not a founder. And you'll also understand that sometimes the most powerful legacies are a blend of both man and myth. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical deep dive. If you enjoyed learning about the secrets of the John Harvard statue, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. We love exploring the fascinating tales hidden in plain sight. Let us know in the comments if you knew about the three lies or if you have any other campus legends you'd like us to investigate. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the history of America's most iconic institutions. Today, we re-exploring a pivotal moment in American higher education, the transformation of Harvard from a respected college into a full-fledged university. This isn't just a story about one school, it's about the birth of the modern American university system. So, grab your notebooks, and let's turn to Chapter 17. Harvard becomes a university. For nearly 2 centuries after its founding in 1636, Harvard was primarily a college. Its main purpose was to train ministers and provide a classical education for the sons of New England's elite. Think Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and theology. It was prestigious, yes, but its scope was limited. The idea of a university, as we know it today, a collection of specialized schools under one banner, was still a European concept. But as the 19th century dawned, America was changing, and its educational needs were evolving along with it. The nation was growing, industries were emerging, and society required more than just clergymen and classically trained gentlemen. It needed lawyers, doctors, and academic leaders with specialized knowledge. Harvard was at a crossroads: remain a traditional college or evolve into something much grander. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual, deliberate process, built upon the foundation of the original college. One of the first and most crucial steps was the formal establishment of professional schools. Let's start with medicine. While medical instruction had existed in some form since the 1780s, the Harvard Medical School was formally established in 1810. This was a massive leap forward. Instead of the old apprenticeship model, where a young man would simply follow a practicing doctor, the medical school offered a structured curriculum, lectures from leading physicians, and a more scientific approach to medicine. It signaled a shift toward professionalizing a field that was, at the time, highly unregulated. The school moved to Boston to be closer to hospitals, creating a vital link between academic learning and practical clinical model that is now standard for medical education worldwide. Next came the law. The Harvard Law School, founded in 1817, would arguably have the most profound impact on the legal profession in America. Before this, legal education was also based on apprenticeship reading law and a practicing attorney's office. It was inconsistent and varied wildly in quality. The law school aimed to change that by treating law not just as a trade, but as a science to be studied systematically. The appointment of Joseph Story, a sitting Supreme Court justice, as a professor in 1829 elevated the school's prestige immensely. Later in the century, under Dean Christopher Columbus Langdell, the school pioneered the case method of teaching law. This revolutionary approach, where students learn legal principles by studying actual court cases, is now the dominant method of legal education in the United States. Harvard wasn't just training lawyers. It was defining how lawyers should be trained. And let's not forget divinity. Harvard's original mission was to train ministers, so it's no surprise that the Divinity School, formally organized in 1816, was another cornerstone of the new university. However, its development reflected the changing religious landscape of New England. It became a center for Unitarian thought, moving away from its stricter Puritan roots. This was significant because it established a principle of intellectual inquiry and academic freedom within theology. The school wasn't just about indoctrinating students with a single creed. It was about the scholarly study of religion, text, and ethics. This intellectual independence became a hallmark of the American Research University, where ideas could be debated and challenged. With these three pillars medicine, and divinity firmly in place alongside the undergraduate college, Harvard began to look like a true university. It was a collection of distinct schools, each with its own faculty, curriculum, and standards, but all united under the Harvard name. This structure allowed for a depth of specialization that was impossible in a traditional college setting. A student could now spend their undergraduate years receiving a broad liberal arts education and then move on to advanced professional training, all within the same institution. This model offered a pathway for creating a highly educated professional class that the growing nation desperately needed. It was a blueprint for excellence and a new vision for what higher education could achieve in America. The impact of this transformation extended far beyond Cambridge. As Harvard established itself as a multifaceted university, other institutions took notice. Yale, Columbia, and the University of Pennsylvania, among others, began to follow a similar path, adding their own professional schools and expanding their curricula. The founding of Johns Hopkins University in 1876, which was explicitly modeled on the German research university ideal and emphasized graduate studies from the start, further accelerated this trend. But it was Harvard that provided the initial, influential American model. It demonstrated how a colonial college could evolve to meet the needs of a modern nation. The idea of the university was no longer a foreign concept. It was an American reality. This period of growth set the stage for the next great era in Harvard's history under President Charles William Eliot, who took office in 1869. Eliot would build upon this university structure to introduce the elective system, further champion academic freedom, and solidify Harvard's position as the nation's leading institution of higher learning. But the groundwork was laid in these early decades of the 19th century. The decision to create separate, professional schools was the architectural choice that allowed the entire edifice of the modern American university to be built. It was a recognition that a complex society requires a diverse range of experts, and that the best way to produce them is through dedicated, rigorous, and specialized education. So, when we think of Harvard today with its dozens of schools and research centers, from the Kennedy School of Government to the Graduate School of Design, we are seeing the legacy of this pivotal transformation. The journey from a small college to a world-renowned university was a long one, marked by vision, innovation, and a constant adaptation to the changing needs of society. It's a story of how an institution redefined itself, and in doing so, redefined the very meaning of higher education in America. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. I hope you found this look into Harvard's evolution as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do you forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so please drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our historical journey. Today, we are diving into a topic that represents the pinnacle of American higher education, Harvard, and the birth of the Ivy League. Have you ever wondered how a single university could become a global symbol of prestige, or how a group of schools came to be known as the legendary Ivy League? Well, buckle up, because we're about to uncover the fascinating story. Our story begins way back in 1636 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The leaders of this new settlement weren't just focused on building homes and farms. They had a grander vision. They understood that for their society to thrive, they needed educated leaders, especially ministers, to guide their Puritan congregations. So, they decided to establish a college. This institution, initially just called the New College, was the very first of its kind in what would become the United States. Its mission was clear: to ensure a literate ministry for the churches of New England. So, where does the name Harvard come from? It's named after a young minister named John Harvard. When he passed away in 1638, he bequeathed his library of over 400 books and half of his estate to the fledgling college. This was a monumental gift at the time, providing the institution with a solid foundation. In gratitude, the colony's leaders officially named the school Harvard College. From its very inception, Harvard was positioned as a cornerstone of intellectual life in America, a place where knowledge and tradition were held in the highest regard. This early start gave it an unparalleled advantage, allowing it to build a legacy brick by brick, year by year, long before any other institution even existed. As Harvard grew in stature, it naturally became the model for other aspiring colleges. Its curriculum, its structure, and its commitment to a classical education set the standard. It wasn't long before other colonies wanted to replicate its success. In 1701, a group of ministers in Connecticut, feeling that Harvard was becoming a bit too liberal in its theology, decided to found their own institution. They wanted a college that would more strictly uphold Puritan orthodoxy. This new school was named Yale College. From the beginning, a friendly but fierce rivalry was born. Yale was created in direct response to Harvard, aiming to be a purer, more traditional alternative. This dynamic of competition and comparison pushed both schools to excel, to attract the best students and faculty, and to build their endowments. The influence didn't stop there. A few decades later, in 1746, the College of New Jersey was founded, which we now know as Princeton University. Like Yale, it was established by a group of New Light Presbyterians who were part of a religious revival and felt the existing colleges weren't meeting their spiritual needs. Princeton quickly developed its own distinct identity, but it was still operating within the educational framework that Harvard had pioneered. Then came King's College in New York City in 1754, which would later be renamed Columbia University. While it was founded with a more secular and urban outlook, it still looked to Harvard as the benchmark for academic excellence. These four institutions, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia, formed the early core of what would become a powerful network of elite schools in the Northeast. They shared a common heritage, a similar mission of educating the nation's future leaders, and an ever-growing sense of shared prestige. So we have these old, prestigious colleges. But where does the term Ivy League actually come from? You might be surprised to learn that it has nothing to do with academics, at least not initially. The term originated in the world of sports by the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These northeastern schools had developed intense athletic rivalries, especially in football. Sports writers began referring to them informally as the Ivy Colleges, a reference to the beautiful ivy-covered stone buildings that characterized their historic campuses. The image of ivy climbing the walls became a powerful symbol of age, tradition, and academic permanence. It was a visual shorthand for a certain kind of old world, elite institution. The term was just a nickname for a long time. There was no official Ivy League. It was a sports writer in the 1930s, Stanley Woodward, who is often credited with popularizing the term Ivy League in print to describe this group of 8 schools that consistently played against each other. He used it to define a specific athletic conference that included Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, as well as Brown, Dartmouth, Cornell, and the University of Pennsylvania. These schools weren't just athletic rivals. They also shared similar high academic standards, selective admissions, and a commitment to a liberal arts education. They were, in essence, a league of their own in more ways than one. The official formation of the Ivy League as an athletic conference didn't happen until 1954. That is when the presidents of these 8 universities signed the first Ivy Group Agreement. This agreement formalized their athletic competition, but more importantly, it codified a shared philosophy. They agreed to de-emphasize the role of athletics, eliminate athletic scholarships, and ensure that athletes were held to the same academic standards as all other students. This was a revolutionary move at a time when many other universities were beginning to professionalize their sports programs. Beyond the Ivy League cemented its identity. It declared that, for them, academics would always come first. The league was about a shared educational ethos, not just winning football games. And so, a term that started as a casual description of old, vine-covered buildings and athletic rivals evolved into a powerful global brand. The Ivy League legacy became synonymous with more than just sports or beautiful campuses. It came to represent a particular kind of excellence, rigorous intellectual inquiry, a vast network of influential alumni, and a gateway to power and success in American society. The history of Harvard is the history of America's first steps into higher education, and the story of the Ivy League is the story of how that initial seed grew into a forest of institutions that have shaped and continue to shape the world. From a single college founded 2 trained ministers to an elite group of 8 universities known worldwide. It's a legacy built over centuries, defined by tradition, rivalry, and an unwavering pursuit of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into academic history. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next chapter. We have so many more stories to uncover together. See you next time. Welcome back to our series, where we unravel the stories of the world's most iconic institutions. Today, we've reached a pivotal chapter in our journey. Harvard in the modern era. If you think you know Harvard, get ready, because its transformation over the past century is nothing short of breathtaking. From an exclusive bastion for the New England elite, it has blossomed into a global powerhouse of intellect and influence. So, how did this venerable university navigate the turbulent waters of the 20th and 21st centuries to become the Harvard we know today? Let's dive in. Picture this: the turn of the 20th century. Harvard is prestigious, yes, but it's on the cusp of a revolution. The world was changing rapidly. Industrialization, world wars, civil rights movements, and Harvard couldn't stand still. It had to evolve, or risk becoming a relic. One of the most significant shifts was the slow, often contentious, but ultimately triumphant journey of women's education. It started with Radcliffe College, the sister school established in 1879, which allowed women to receive instruction from Harvard professors. For decades, it was a separate but unequal system. Radcliffe students were brilliant, but they weren't officially Harvard students. This arrangement persisted for nearly a century, a reflection of the societal norms of the time. But pioneers and advocates never gave up. Finally, in 1977, a historic merger began, and by 1999, Radcliffe was fully integrated. Harvard's gates, once closed to half the population, were now officially open. This wasn't just about adding numbers. It was about adding new perspectives, new talents, and new ideas that would fundamentally enrich the university. This push for inclusion didn't stop with gender. The latter half of the 20th century saw a seismic shift in Harvard's approach to the civil rights movement, and a growing awareness of social justice forced the university to confront its history of exclusivity. It was a long road, but initiatives to recruit students from different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds began to take root. Financial aid programs were massively expanded, aiming to make a Harvard education accessible based on merit, not wealth. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Talent is everywhere, and a world-class university should reflect the world. This commitment transformed the campus from a homogeneous enclave into a vibrant mosaic of cultures and experiences. The conversations in classrooms, the debates in dining halls, the art, the music, everything became richer, more complex, and more representative of the global community Harvard sought to lead. Alongside this social transformation, Harvard was cementing its reputation as a crucible of innovation. The university became a key player in the scientific and technological revolutions of the modern age. Think about the birth of the computer. It was here, in the 1940s, that Howard Aiken, a Harvard physicist, developed the Mark I, a pioneering electromechanical computer that was a direct ancestor of the digital devices we use every day. Fast forward to the biotech revolution. Harvard labs were at the forefront of genetic engineering and molecular biology, leading to breakthroughs that have reshaped medicine. The university fostered an environment where brilliant minds were not just allowed, but encouraged to challenge conventional wisdom and pursue audacious ideas. This spirit of innovation wasn't confined to the sciences. The Kennedy School of Government, established in 1936, redefined the study of public policy, training leaders to tackle complex global challenges. The business school, with its famous case study method, became the gold standard for management education worldwide. Harvard wasn't just teaching knowledge, it was creating it. And what about its influence on the world stage? It's impossible to overstate. Harvard became a de facto training ground for global leadership. Walk the halls of power in Washington, D.C., and you'll find Harvard alumni everywhere. From Franklin D. Roosevelt, who steered America through the Great Depression and World War II, to John F. Kennedy, whose New Frontier inspired a generation. Harvard graduates have occupied the Oval Office more than those from any other university, but its political influence extends far beyond the U.S. presidency. Supreme Court senators, governors, and countless world leaders, from heads of state to UN officials, have walked through Harvard Yard. They carried with them not just a degree, but a network and a way of thinking that has shaped international relations, economic policy, and legal frameworks across the globe. The university became a nexus point where future leaders met, debated, and forged the relationships that would later define world events. Of course, we can't talk about Harvard's modern legacy without celebrating the extraordinary individuals who passed through its gates and went on to change the world. These are the names that echo in history. In science, you have figures like J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, a brilliant and complex figure whose work at Harvard foreshadowed his world-altering role in the Manhattan Project. In the arts, think of Leonard Bernstein, the legendary composer and conductor, or the poet T.S. Eliot, whose work redefined modern literature. In the world of business and technology, the story is legendary. A young sophomore named Bill Gates dropped out to found Microsoft, launching the personal computer revolution. A few decades later, another sophomore, Mark Zuckerberg, created Facebook in his dorm room, fundamentally changing how humanity connects. These are not just success stories. They are testaments to an environment that, at its best, identifies raw talent and gives it the space to grow, to experiment, and sometimes to fail on its way to greatness. So, as we close this chapter, what is the essence of modern Harvard? It's a story of transformation. It's the story of an institution that learned, sometimes painfully, to open its doors and its mind. It evolved from a regional college for the privileged few into a global beacon for the exceptionally talented, regardless of their background. Its impact is felt in the laws that govern us, the technology we use, the medicine that heals us, and the art that inspires us. The story of modern Harvard is a testament to the power of education to not only reflect the world, but to actively shape it. It proves that even the oldest institutions can reinvent themselves and remain profoundly relevant in a constantly changing world. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Harvard's modern history. It's a fascinating and complex story, and we've only scratched the surface. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let me know which institution or historical chapter you'd like to see us explore next. Until then, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we arrive at a significant milestone, a moment where we pause to reflect on the very essence of what we've been exploring. We call this chapter The Spirit of 1636, a tribute to a year that planted a seed destined to grow for centuries. What is it about this spirit that has endured, that has allowed an idea to not just survive, but to flourish beyond anyone's wildest dreams? It's a powerful combination, a trinity of virtues: faith, knowledge, and courage. Let's start with faith, not just in a religious sense, though that was certainly a driving force for the founders, but faith in the future. Faith in the idea that educating the next generation was not a luxury, but a necessity for the survival and prosperity of their new world. It was a profound belief that by investing in the minds of their children, they were building a society that could withstand any storm, a society grounded in principle and reason. This wasn't just optimism. It was a deep abiding trust in the power of human potential. They believed that a better future was possible, and that education was the only path to get there. Next, let's talk about knowledge. The founders of Harvard weren't just thinking about basic literacy. They envisioned a place where the great works of theology, philosophy, classical literature, and science could be studied, debated, and advanced. They understood that knowledge wasn't a static collection of facts to be memorized. It was a living, breathing finger tool for understanding the world, for solving complex problems, and for elevating the human condition. They sought to create a bastion against ignorance, a place where intellectual curiosity would be the highest virtue. Dis pursuit, or veritas, or truth, became the cornerstone of the institution, a guiding light that has shone through nearly 4 centuries. The Spirit of 1636 is a testament to the idea that a society that values knowledge is a society that will always be moving forward. And finally, we have courage. Let's truly put ourselves in their shoes for a moment. Imagine standing in the rugged wilderness of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1636. Life was a daily struggle for survival. You're facing harsh winters, scarce resources, and the constant uncertainty of building a life from scratch. In the midst of all this hardship, what did you decide to found a college? Think about the sheer audacity of that decision. It would have been far easier, far more practical, to focus only on immediate needs: building houses, planting crops, fortifying defenses. But they dared to look beyond the horizon. It took immense courage to allocate precious resources, time, and energy to an enterprise whose true rewards would not be seen for generations. It was a courageous act of defiance against the limitations of their circumstances, a bold declaration that their ambition was not just to survive, but to build a civilization. So, when we talk about the spirit of 1636, we're talking about this remarkable fusion. It's the faith that a better world is buildable, the dedication to the knowledge required to build it, and the courage to begin the work, even in the most challenging of times. This isn't just a story about the founding of a university. It's a universal lesson about human aspiration. It's a spirit that has echoed through the ages, inspiring countless others to pursue their own ambitious dreams against all odds. Now, let's trace the physical manifestation of this spirit. Picture it. A single wooden building, perhaps not much larger than a spacious house today, standing in a small yard in Newtown, which would soon be renamed Cambridge. A handful of students, a single master. The curriculum was rigorous, rooted in the classical traditions of Oxford and Cambridge, but the setting was anything but grand. This was the humble beginning, a flickering candle of learning in what was, for all intents and purposes, a vast, untamed wilderness. There were no sprawling campuses, no magnificent libraries, no billion-dollar endowments. There was just an idea, and a small group of people with the conviction to see it through. From that solitary wooden structure, something incredible began to happen. With each passing decade, the college grew. A new building was added, then another. The student body expanded, the curriculum evolved, embracing new fields of science and thought that the original founders could never have imagined. The college survived wars, economic depressions, social upheavals, and political turmoil. Through it all, that core spirit, that blend of faith, knowledge, and courage acted as its anchor and its engine. It wasn't a smooth, uninterrupted path. There were times of struggle, of doubt, but the legacy was too strong to be extinguished. Fast forward to today. That single wooden building in a fledgling colony has transformed into one of the world's most renowned and influential universities. Its campus is a city within a city, with state-of-the-art laboratories, world-class museums, and libraries holding millions of volumes. Its name is a global symbol of academic excellence and intellectual rigor. Its alumni have walked on the moon, led nations, won Nobel Prizes, written timeless literature, and pioneered technologies that have reshaped our world. The journey from that simple wooden frame to the global powerhouse of today is one of the most extraordinary stories of institutional evolution in human history. It's a living, breathing monument to the power of a single, well-founded idea. What can we take away from this incredible transformation? The story of Harvard is more than just the history of one institution. It is a powerful reminder that the greatest achievements often have the humblest of origins. The path from a small, audacious idea to a world-changing reality is paved with persistence, adaptation, and an unwavering commitment to the founding principles. It shows us that you don't need vast resources to start something meaningful. What you need is a powerful vision and the determination to nurture it, to protect it, and to help it grow, day by day, year by year, generation by generation. As we bring this chapter to a close, let's hold on to its central, inspiring message. The spirit of 1636 is not locked away in a dusty history book or confined to the stone walls of a university. It's a timeless principle that lives within each of us. It's the spark of belief in a better tomorrow, the drive to learn and understand our world, and the bravery to take that first, difficult step toward an ambitious goal. The story we've just explored serves as the ultimate proof. Every great idea starts with a dream just like Harvard's. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of our journey. I hope it's left you feeling inspired. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue exploring these incredible stories with me, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you in the next video.